The silence in our home was the first thing that broke me after my husband David passed away. But today, I was going to fill it with a plan, with the future he and I built over 40 years. Our life savings were more than just money. They were our shared dreams in a simple bank account. I logged in, ready to see that comforting number, but the screen showed a balance that made the air leave my lungs. It was nearly empty. All of it, just gone. The room started to spin. I felt the cold stares of my neighbours, the whispers at the grocery store, picturing me as the foolish old widow who had lost everything. This wasn't just my savings, it was my dignity, and my own family had taken it. Friend, before I tell you about the phone call I made next, and the cold, sharp words my own daughter used to cut me deeper, please tap subscribe. Do it so you're here to see how I took their betrayal and turned it into their greatest regret. I refreshed the page again and again, praying it was a mistake, a cruel glitch in the system. But the number remained, small and mocking. The transaction history showed a series of large withdrawals, all recent, all to a name I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was only one other person in the world who had access to that account. With a hand that wouldn't stop shaking, I picked up the phone to call my daughter Sarah, a single, terrifying question burning on my lips. Each ring of the phone felt like a lifetime. When my daughter Sarah finally answered, her voice was light and cheerful, as if she were calling from another world, a world where my heart wasn't shattering into a million pieces. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what I saw, the empty account, the missing money. She just laughed, a short, brittle laugh that did nothing to soothe me. "Mom, don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone suddenly annoyed. "It's not gone, it's invested." She told me her new boyfriend, a man named Mark, was a financial genius and had found a brilliant opportunity for us. A name I'd never heard was now attached to every penny David and I had ever saved, and I felt a fresh wave of panic. My daughter was talking about our future, but all I could hear was a stranger's voice in the background. "I want to speak to him," I demanded, my voice cracking. "Put this Mark on the phone right now." There was a moment of silence and Sarah said she would. But before she could, I heard a man's hushed, urgent whisper on her end of the line. The sound was sharp and commanding, and then the call went dead. The silence that followed was colder and more terrifying than anything I had ever felt before for the next hour. I called my daughter Sarah, back again and again, but every single call went straight to her voicemail. The machine's cheerful greeting felt like a personal insult. The trust I had placed in my only child was dissolving into a dark, ugly suspicion. I wasn't just dealing with a mistake. I was being deliberately shut out by my own flesh and blood. When my phone finally rang, her name flashing on the screen, I answered with a knot of dread in my stomach. "I am so sorry, Mom." Sarah's voice was now overly sweet, like honey meant to hide the taste of poison. "We were driving through a tunnel and lost service." The lie was so thin, so insulting, it made my head spin. She went on to explain that Mark had put the money into an exclusive fund, promising returns so massive they sounded like a fairy tale. She promised documents were on their way. But when I asked for the name of the fund, the name of the company, anything I could hold on to, her voice faltered. She stumbled over a generic name that sounded like she was making it up on the spot. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the silence on the other end of the line, and I knew. My daughter wasn't just confused or mistaken. She was lying to me, and in that moment, I understood that I was completely and utterly alone in this fight. I drove to the bank the next morning, clinging to a desperate hope that this was all a giant, terrible mistake, something a polite teller in a pressed suit could fix with a few keystrokes. I sat across from the branch manager, a kind-looking man named Mr. Harrison, and laid out the whole story. He listened patiently, his expression growing more and more concerned. He typed furiously into his computer, his brow furrowed, and for a moment, I let myself believe he had found the answer. But when he turned back to me, his eyes were full of a quiet pity that felt worse than anger. He confirmed the transfers. They were large, they were recent, and because they were made using the login information that my daughter Sarah had access to, they were considered authorized. "I'm sorry, Carol," he said, his voice gentle. "From our perspective, this isn't fraud. It's a family matter." His words hung in the air, a final sterile judgment. The system David and I had trusted our entire lives to protect us had now become my prison. The bank's polished wood and quiet efficiency offered no comfort, only the cold, hard truth that I had been locked out of my own life. I walked out of that building and into the bright afternoon sun, but I had never felt so cold, or so completely and utterly alone. My car seemed to drive itself to Sarah's apartment, my hands gripping the wheel with a strength I didn't know I had. I needed to see her, to look her in the eye and demand the truth. I let myself in with the emergency key she had given me years ago, a key that now felt like a relic from a different life. The apartment was empty, but a laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter, its screen glowing, and what I saw on it stopped my heart. It was an open email chain between Sarah and Mark. But it wasn't a conversation. It was a script. He had written out, word for word, everything she was supposed to say to me. The fake investment, the promises of huge returns, the lie about the tunnel. It was all there. He was the puppet master, and my daughter, my sweet Sarah, was the puppet on his strings. This wasn't just a man influencing her. This was a calculated, cruel performance. I scrolled down, my blood turning to ice. The last message from him was a single, chilling line. "Just keep her calm until the final transfer clears, then it's done." It wasn't just that my daughter had been manipulated. It was that she had let herself be. She was a willing partner in this nightmare, and the depth of that betrayal was a chasm that opened right at my feet. I drove home in a daze, the grief in my heart so heavy I could barely breathe. But as I walked through my front door, into the quiet, empty rooms that held a lifetime of memories, something inside me shifted. The sorrow didn't disappear, but it began to burn, hardening into a cold, sharp resolve. I was not going to be the foolish old widow. I was not going to be a victim. I was David's wife, and I was Sarah's mother, and I would not let this stand. I went into David's old office, a room I hadn't touched since he passed. His presence was still there, in the neat stacks of paper, the worn leather of his chair. He was a meticulous man, a man who planned for everything. I started opening drawers, searching for something, anything that could help me, and then I found it. Tucked away in his desk was a small, unassuming business card for a private investigator, a man named Thorne he'd once mentioned, a man he had trusted. A strange calm settled over me. The tears stopped. I picked up the phone, my hand steady now. I was no longer just a heartbroken mother reacting to the pain. I was a lioness whose territory had been invaded, and I was about to start my hunt. This was no longer just about getting my money back. This was about taking back my life. The investigator, Mr. Thorne, began his work with a quiet efficiency that calmed my frayed nerves. He didn't make promises. He just asked for facts, and I gave them to him. 2 days later, he called me with his first report, and every word he spoke confirmed the dark pit of fear that had opened in my stomach. The man my daughter Sarah was in love with didn't seem to exist. "He's a digital ghost, Carol." Thorne's voice was grim over the phone. "There's no credible work history, no real social media, and the address he gave your daughter traces back to a mail drop in another state." It got worse. The investment company, the one with the professional-looking website that promised a golden future, was a phantom too. The site had only been created 3 months ago, a cheap template bought online. It was all a lie, a house of cards built to collapse. I listened, silent, as the pieces clicked into place. My daughter hadn't just made a bad investment or fallen for a charming man. She had walked into a trap that had been set with terrifying precision. Thorne's final words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. "This isn't just a con," he said. "This is a hunt, and you, Carol, were the target." Armed with the investigator's chilling report, I did something Thorne advised against. I called my daughter Sarah. I thought if I could just show her the proof, if I could make her see the fake address and the phantom company, the spell this man had cast over her would break. I was wrong. The moment I started talking, her voice, once so full of light, turned sharp and cold, filled with a venom that shocked me to my core. "You're spying on me," she hissed, the accusation like a slap in the face. "You hired someone to dig into my life, to try and ruin the one good thing I have?" She defended Mark with a blind fury, twisting every fact I presented into an attack on her happiness. She told me I was a lonely old woman, jealous that she had found love, and a future away from the past I was clinging to. Every word was a knife. I was no longer her mother. I was the enemy. The call ended with her screaming, her voice raw with anger. "You will never see a dime of it again if you don't stop this right now. You'll be left with nothing." She hung up, leaving me in a stunned silence, the threat echoing in the empty house. She had made her choice, and she had chosen him. When I told Mr. Thorne what happened, he wasn't surprised. "It's a classic tactic," he explained calmly. "Isolate the target from their family. Make them the enemy." He gave me a simple, difficult instruction. "Stop all contact." "Let them think you've given up," he said. "Let them think they've won. They'll get sloppy, and that's when we'll find our opening." So I waited, the silence in my house growing heavier each day, my faith hanging by a single thread. Thorne focused his attention away from the people and onto the money. He began the painstaking work of following the digital breadcrumbs from my savings account. It wasn't a simple transfer. The money had been fractured, split into smaller amounts, and funneled through a dizzying maze of shell corporations and anonymous digital wallets. It was a web spun by an expert, designed for one purpose, to make a lifetime of hard work vanish into thin air. For weeks it seemed hopeless, every path leading to a dead end. But Thorne was patient. He was looking for a single mistake, one loose thread in the tangled mess. And then, late one night, he found it. One of the shell companies, buried under layers of corporate shields, had a name listed as its registered agent. It was a small thing, a tiny bureaucratic detail, but it was the first real clue we had. The single loose thread that the investigator, Mr. Thorne, found led him down a rabbit hole of corporate records and legal filings. He followed the trail of the registered agent, a name that led to another company, which led to another, like a set of nesting dolls designed to hide a secret. It took him a week of painstaking work, but he finally unspooled the entire thing and found where it ended. He called me late at night, his voice heavy. "Carol, the money isn't in the country anymore," he said, and I felt my stomach drop. He explained that the shell companies were just a temporary smokescreen. The final destination for my life savings was a single, offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. An account set up to be anonymous, untouchable, and forever out of my reach. The professional sophistication of it all was terrifying, but it was the name of the corporation that held the account that finally broke my heart. The official, legal name on the documents was SM Futures, S for Sarah, M for Mark. It wasn't just a theft. They had branded their crime with their initials, creating a monument to their betrayal. The con wasn't just about money. It was about building a future on the ashes of mine. The news of the offshore account left me feeling hollow and defeated. It felt like a final checkmate. How could I, a widow in a quiet house, possibly fight a ghost with a secret bank account halfway across the world? I retreated into my husband David's old office, the one place where I still felt his strength. I sank into his worn leather chair, surrounded by his books and papers, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself truly cry. My hand brushed against an old leather-bound journal on his desk, one he used for his private thoughts and notes. I opened it, and reading his familiar, steady handwriting felt like hearing his voice again. I read for an hour, losing myself in his plans for our retirement, his funny observations about the neighbours, his deep love for me. It was a comfort and a pain all at once. Then a single passage jumped out at me. In an entry from years ago, he wrote about setting up a final rainy day plan, a security measure so secret he never even told me about it. "If the worst ever happens," he wrote, "the key is where our promises are kept." He didn't write the location. He had left me a riddle, a final message of love and protection that only I could possibly understand. Where our promises are kept. The words echoed in my mind, and I knew the answer instantly. The loose brick in our backyard fireplace. It was where David and I used to hide our anniversary gifts for each other every year, a silly, romantic tradition. My hands trembled as I knelt on the cold stone, my fingers finding the familiar edge of the loose brick. I pulled it free, and there, wrapped in a small cloth, was a single old-fashioned key. The next morning, I went to a different bank, a small credit union across town. The key was for a safety deposit box I never knew existed. The bank employee led me into the vault, a quiet, cold room that felt like a sacred place. She left me alone, and with a deep breath, I turned the key. Inside the metal box was a thick envelope. I found a few $1,000s in emergency cash, which brought a wave of relief. But beneath it was something far more important, something that made my heart stop. It was a single piece of paper, signed and notarized by David years ago. A document that granted me his sole, undisputed power of attorney over all of our assets. I held it in my hands, the paper cool against my skin. It wasn't just a document, it was a sword. Holding the power of attorney felt like holding a shield. It was a piece of my husband, David, a final gift of protection, and it renewed my resolve. I immediately called the investigator, Mr. Thorne, and told him what I'd found. This new legal authority gave him more leverage, more avenues to pursue. He told me to hold on to it, to keep it as our secret weapon. In the meantime, he continued to dig into the shadowy corporation that now held my future. He focused on Mark, cross-referencing the fake name with the details of the offshore account. A week later, he called me with a breakthrough. He had found a digital ghost trail from a similar scheme that had happened a year ago in a neighbouring state. The methods were identical, the lies were the same, and at the centre of it was a man who looked exactly like Mark, but with a different name. He had preyed on another woman. Her name was Emily, and her story was a heartbreaking echo of my own. She was also a widow, and she had lost her entire inheritance. I stared at the picture Thorne sent me of this woman, a stranger with the same pain in her eyes that I saw in the mirror every morning. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were not the only two. It took me 2 days to build up the courage to call the number Thorne gave me. What right did I have to intrude on this woman's grief, to ask her to relive her deepest humiliation? But the thought of Mark moving on to his next victim, of another family being destroyed, pushed me forward. I dialed, and when Emily answered, her voice was small and brittle, like a leaf about to crumble. At first she wanted to hang up. The shame was too much. "I can't," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I just want to forget." But I didn't let her go. I told her my story. I told her about my daughter, Sarah, and the hollow ache of betrayal. I didn't speak to her as an investigator or a stranger, but as a fellow survivor, and slowly, the wall between us came down. We were two women from different lives, now bound by the same scar. By the end of the call, her voice was stronger. She agreed to help. Then she told me something that made my heart leap. "He left me a voicemail once," she said. "He was gloating, bragging about his foolproof system." She had saved it, thinking it was useless. But it wasn't. It was his voice, his arrogance, his confession, all captured on a tiny digital file. The voicemail from Emily was the key that unlocked everything. It provided the investigator, Mr. Thorne, with a voice print and a direct link between Mark's different aliases. He used it to dive deeper into the man's past, and what he unearthed was far more sinister than a simple con artist. Mark wasn't just a thief, he was a predator who operated with the cold precision of a hunter. Thorne uncovered a clear and disgusting pattern. Mark targeted grieving women, finding them in online support groups and at church grief counselling sessions. He would swoop in during their most vulnerable moments, offering comfort and a shoulder to cry on, all while slowly, methodically gaining their trust and access to their finances. He had a playbook, and he had used it again and again. Thorne found evidence of at least 4 other victims across 3 states, each one left emotionally and financially shattered. My personal nightmare was not unique. It was a chapter in a much longer, darker story. The fight was no longer just about my money or even about saving my daughter Sarah. I was standing at the edge of a web, and I realised with a chilling certainty that I wasn't just fighting to get my life back. I was hunting a monster. We had a pattern, we had other victims, but the investigator, Mr. Thorne, told me we were still missing one crucial thing: a direct, undeniable link between Mark's instructions and my daughter Sarah's actions. The police could dismiss everything else as a family dispute gone wrong. We needed to hear him pull the strings. That's when the most terrifying idea I'd ever had took root in my mind, an idea that felt wrong, like a betrayal in itself, but one I knew was necessary. Thorne gave me a tiny, voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a sugar cube. The next afternoon, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock, I let myself into Sarah's apartment while she and Mark were out. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt and placed the tiny device under the lip of the living room couch. I was in and out in less than 2 minutes, but as I drove away, I felt like I had crossed a line. I had spied on my own daughter, violating her home and her trust in the most profound way. But as I pictured Mark's smug smile, I knew I had no other choice. I had planted a silent witness in the heart of the enemy's camp, and now all I could do was wait and pray it would hear the truth. For 2 long days, the recorder was my obsession. I listened to hours of audio, but it was all frustratingly normal. The sounds of the television, discussions about what to have for dinner, empty chatter. I started to lose hope, the fear creeping in that my risky gamble had been for nothing. I worried that they had found the device, or worse, that the charming, friendly man on the recordings was the only man there was, and I was going mad. Then, on the 3rd night, I downloaded a new file. The conversation was different. It was late, and their voices were low and urgent. It was Mark, but his tone was one I had never heard before. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp impatience. "The stocks have to be liquidated by Friday, Sarah," he said, his voice a low command. "The market is about to shift, and we will lose everything." He was talking about my husband David's stock portfolio, the last major piece of our life together. He wasn't asking her. He was telling her. He was pressuring her, his words clipped and demanding. The mask was finally off. I wasn't listening to a charming boyfriend anymore. I was listening to a cold, calculating stranger who had my daughter and my future firmly in his grip. As I continued to listen to the chilling recording, my focus shifted from Mark's cold commands to my daughter Sarah's responses. I expected to hear agreement or the same venom she had shown me on the phone. Instead, what I heard was a flicker of the girl I used to know. Her voice was small, laced with a fear that was unmistakable. "I don't know, Mark," she stammered. "My dad loved those stocks. It just feels wrong." There it was, a crack in the wall he had built around her, a moment of doubt. But Mark's response came instantly, and it was brutal. "Wrong?" he snapped, his voice dangerously low. "It's too late to worry about wrong, Sarah. You're in this just as deep as I am. Did you forget that?" His words were a threat, a cold reminder that she was no longer just his girlfriend. She was his accomplice. My heart ached as the truth settled over me. I had been so blinded by my own pain and anger that I had only seen Sarah as a traitor. But listening to her voice, small and scared in the dark, I finally understood. She was a victim too. She was a prisoner in her own life, trapped by her own bad decisions and the monster she had mistaken for a savior. And that changed everything. Knowing my daughter Sarah was trapped gave my mission a new, desperate urgency. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was a rescue. I spoke with the investigator, Mr. Thorne, and together we devised a plan, not an attack but a carefully set trap. I called our longtime family accountant, a man named George who had been my husband David's most trusted friend for over 30 years. I told him everything. Using the power of attorney David had left me, I gave George a simple instruction: freeze all of David's stocks immediately. When my daughter or Mark called, he was to inform them that the entire estate was under a mandatory audit and that no assets could be touched without my direct, notarized signature. George, loyal to David's memory and furious at what had been done, agreed without hesitation. The trap was simple, but it was perfect. We had cut off their access to the last pool of money. They were now cornered, their plans stalled. They would be forced to make a move, to do something desperate to get to the money they thought was theirs. All we had to do was wait for the panicked animals to step into the snare we had laid for them. It only took a day. George called me, his voice grim. "She called, Carol, just like you said." My daughter, Sarah, had been frantic, demanding to know why the assets were frozen. George had held his ground, calmly repeating the story about the audit. He told her the only way to release the funds was with a signed and notarized letter of instruction directly from me. Sarah had hung up without another word. 2 days later, a letter arrived at George's office via courier. It was a formal request to liquidate all stocks and transfer the funds to a new account. At the bottom was my signature. It was a perfect copy, a flawless imitation of my handwriting. But George knew I hadn't sent it. He called me immediately, and I felt a cold dread spread through me as I realized what she had done. The investigator, Mr. Thorne, confirmed it within an hour. It was a high-quality digital forgery, copied from a document Sarah must have found in the house. This changed everything. This wasn't just another lie or a cruel betrayal. This was a serious, calculated crime. My daughter had crossed a line, and now I held the proof in my hands, a piece of paper that could send her to prison. I sat in my kitchen all night, the forged document on the table in front of me. It felt heavier than a block of stone. For weeks, I had been the victim, the one who had been wronged. But now, holding this piece of paper, the power had shifted completely. I finally had the weapon I needed to end this, to bring Mark down and expose the entire scheme. But the price of that victory would be my own daughter. My mind was a whirlwind of memories. I saw Sarah as a little girl, holding my hand as she learned to walk. I saw her on her first day of school, her face a mixture of terror and excitement. I had spent my entire life protecting her, and now I was the one poised to destroy her future. Was this justice? Or was it just a colder, more righteous form of revenge? I looked up at the photo of David on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes smiling back at me. I asked him what he would do. The answer came to me in the quiet of the house. He would protect our legacy. He would protect our family from the poison that had infected it. And that meant seeing this through to the very end, no matter how much it hurt. I picked up the phone to call Thorne, my decision made. There was no turning back now. With my decision made, the path forward became clear. This couldn't be a quiet, private confrontation. The lies that Mark and my daughter Sarah had built were designed to thrive in the shadows, to isolate me and make me feel crazy. I knew then that the only way to destroy their web was to drag it into the light. The truth needed witnesses. My family needed to see the poison that had been injected into our lives with their own eyes. So I began to make the calls. I invited my brothers, my sister, my nieces and nephews, all to a special dinner at my house to finalize David's estate. Then came the hardest call. I phoned Sarah, my voice calm and steady. I told her I was done fighting, that I wanted to make peace for her father's memory. I invited her and Mark to the dinner as a final peace offering. I could hear the smug satisfaction in her voice as she accepted. She thought I had finally surrendered, that the old woman had been broken. She and Mark believed they were walking into a victory celebration. They had no idea they were walking into a courtroom where the jury was their own family, and I was the one who would be presenting the evidence. The day of the dinner, my house filled with the sounds of life for the first time in months. My family gathered, sharing stories about David, their laughter a warm blanket over the cold anxiety in my chest. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, a gracious host on the outside, but a general preparing for battle on the inside. In the corner of the living room, I had set up a projector and a small screen. My nephew asked what it was for. "Just a small memorial I put together for your uncle," I said with a sad smile. "A few photos to remember him by." They all thought it was a lovely idea. No one knew that the slideshow I had prepared was not about David's life, but about the calculated destruction of everything he had built. Outside, the investigator, Mr. Thorne, sat in an unmarked car down the street, a complete file of evidence on the seat beside him, ready to be delivered to the police the moment I gave the signal. Every piece was in its place. The stage was set. Then, the doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the warm chatter. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was them. I opened the door, and there they were. My daughter, Sarah, and the man who had destroyed her, Mark. They were all smiles, holding a bottle of wine as a gift. Mark gave me a hug, his arm around my shoulder feeling like a snake, while Sarah kissed my cheek, her lips cold against my skin. They moved through the room, accepting condolences from relatives, playing their parts with sickening perfection. We all sat down for dinner. I watched them from the head of the table, my husband David's empty chair beside me. They laughed, they told stories, they blended in seamlessly with the family they had been systematically robbing. My heart was a storm of grief and rage, but my hands were perfectly steady as I picked up my wineglass. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. I raised my glass, looking directly at Sarah and Mark. "To family," I began, my voice clear and strong. "To the truth, which always finds its way into the light. And finally, to getting what you deserve." They smiled, raising their glasses to mine, completely oblivious to the blade hidden in my words. As I took a sip, I held their gaze, knowing that in a few minutes their world would be set on fire. After dinner, I asked everyone to move to the living room. "It's time," I said, my voice gentle. I dimmed the lights and turned on the projector. The family settled in, their faces soft with anticipation, ready to see photos of my beloved David. The first image that flashed on the screen was not of my husband. It was a picture of a sad-eyed, unfamiliar woman. A confused murmur went through the room. Before anyone could speak, a video call window opened, and that same woman appeared, live. "My name is Emily," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Her eyes found the webcam, and it felt as if she was staring directly at Mark. "A little over a year ago, my husband passed away. A man who called himself Adam came into my life. He was charming and kind, and he promised to help me invest my inheritance." The room was deathly silent. Sarah shot a panicked look at Mark, whose face had gone pale. "That man," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger, "is sitting in this room with you right now. But you know him as Mark." She looked straight at him through the screen, her voice ringing with the terrible, clear bell of truth. "He didn't invest my money. He stole it. He stole everything." For a moment, the only sound was Emily's heavy breathing from the computer speakers. Then Mark erupted in a short, harsh laugh. "Is this a joke?" he asked, looking around the room at the shocked faces of my family. "This is insane. This woman is a crazy ex-girlfriend I had years ago. She's obsessed." He was trying to take back control, to paint me as a vengeful old woman and Emily as a liar. Some of my family members looked confused, their loyalty wavering. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up the remote and closed Emily's video call. In its place, I opened an audio file. The screen went blank, and a sound filled the room that was far more damning than any picture. It was Mark's voice, not the charming one everyone knew, but the cold, impatient one from the recording. "The stocks have to be liquidated by Friday, Sarah," his voice commanded through the speakers. "It's too late to worry about wrong. You're in this just as deep as I am." The shift in the room was instant and total. Every eye, which had been on the screen, now turned to my daughter. The blood drained from Sarah's face. The lie was one thing, but the recorded truth was a cage she could not escape. The sound of Mark's voice hung in the air like a poison. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. My daughter Sarah stared at the faces of her family, her aunts, her uncles, her cousins, all looking at her with a dawning horror. The weight of their gazes was too much to bear. Her carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of lies, finally came crashing down around her. A terrible ragged sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure anguish. She covered her face with her hands and began to weep uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she choked out, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Through her tears, the whole ugly story came tumbling out. The lies, the transfers, the pressure from Mark, the forged signature. She confessed everything. She told them how it started small, how he had convinced her it was the only way to secure their future, and how once she started, she was too scared to stop. Her confession wasn't an excuse. It was the sound of a soul breaking. The truth was finally out, not as a clean victory, but as a raw, gaping wound in the centre of our family. As my daughter Sarah's confession ended in a fit of heartbreaking sobs, Mark seemed to transform. The panic in his eyes hardened into a cold, reptilian glare. He stood up, his voice no longer panicked but smooth and full of a sickening sincerity. "She's hysterical," he said, gesturing to Sarah as if she were a stranger. "She doesn't know what she's saying. Carol has been feeding her these lies." He turned to my family, his eyes pleading. "This was all her idea," he said, pointing a shaking finger at me. "An insurance fraud scheme. She wanted to hide the assets after David's death and convinced us to help her. Now she's trying to frame me to keep it all for herself." He pulled out his phone and displayed an email on the screen, an email that looked like it was from me, outlining the entire fraudulent plan. A wave of confusion washed over the room. The lie was monstrous, but he was so convincing. For one horrible, breathless moment, my family looked from the screen to my weeping daughter, and then to me. A seed of doubt had been planted, and in their eyes I could see it beginning to take root. Just as the doubt began to fester in the silent room, I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod towards the front door. It opened, and the investigator, Mr. Thorne, stepped inside. He was calm, professional, and held a laptop in his hand. "Good evening," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "My name is John Thorne. I'm a private financial investigator, and I believe I can clear a few things up." He calmly connected his laptop to the projector. Mark's face went white. First, Thorne displayed a forensic analysis of the email on Mark's phone, showing with cold, undeniable data that it had been created less than 48 hours ago. The lie was exposed. Then, image after image filled the screen. The forged signature, the complex web of offshore accounts, the names and photos of his other victims, including Emily. He laid out the entire predatory scheme for my family to see. Cornered, exposed, and with nowhere left to run, Mark's composure finally shattered. He bolted, shoving my nephew aside as he scrambled for the front door. But when he threw it open, he was not met with the dark night, but with 2 uniformed police officers. The trap had closed. In the aftermath, with the police gone and the house finally quiet, my family surrounded me. Their apologies and their love were a balm on my wounded heart. I found my daughter Sarah sitting alone, her face streaked with tears. I didn't offer her empty forgiveness. Not yet. I offered her a path. "You will cooperate with the police," I told her, my voice quiet but firm. "And you will spend the rest of your life making this right." My story does not end there. The legal battles were long, but in the end most of the money was recovered. Sarah, true to her word, is working to repay the rest. But the money was never the point. It was about reclaiming my life. A few months ago, I walked into the bank and established a foundation in my husband David's name, a non-profit dedicated to helping the victims of predators like Mark. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the very end. If you believe that strength isn't about how you fall, but how you get back up, then please tap subscribe and join our community. You won't want to miss the stories we share next. I've picked out another story just for you, about a woman who contacted my foundation last week. You should see it on the screen now. I hope to see you there.